Let's begin with my first guest, Dr. Rachael Piltch-Loeb, a public health expert, advocate, and author of the upcoming book, The Millennial Caregiver. She's candidly sharing her personal experience as a caregiver in her 30s, and her voice has become a relatable and honest presence for a generation navigating burnout, identity shifts, and the reality of caring for others while trying to care for themselves. And here, Rachael Piltch-Loeb, welcome to the Chundria Show. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Well, let's
Good.
dive on in today. Now, you've spoken really openly about being a caregiver in your 30s. I'm curious, in meeting you, how did that role reshape your identity personally and professionally?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to now imagine life having not had that experience. I became a caregiver both for my children, my first child, right around the time that I turned 30, and for my aging and declining father, who was in his late 50s and diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. And that kind of parallel experience of seeing one person ail and one person come into the world and grow has really shaped my perspective just on many things. I think personally, it's taught me to be patient, to recognize that time is a thief, and to kind of savor the time a little bit more when you have it with people you care about and love. To think about time management and how we structure our days to make sure we can incorporate all of our priorities a little bit effectively, to really try and build on that prioritization in terms of what's important, not only in how we spend our time, but in what I want to achieve and who I want to be a part of it. And I think professionally, it's also made me take a step back and think, what is it that's meaningful to me as I pursue my career advancement and as I try and make the best of what is kind of a limited window of being able to pursue things that we care about. So it's really shaped, I think, my view on my own development and on how I interact with other people, because I think caregiving is such a life-changing experience for so many.
And I can relate wholeheartedly to, caring for aging parents or even grandparents, that a lot of people step up to the plate to do. And I know it can be a difficult experience, but how can we find joy even in those times in caregiving?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's critical. We have to be able to kind of hold joy and sorrow in our heart and in our mind at the same time, because caregiving doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can watch your child's first steps and then have to take a phone call where your parent has taken a fall and needs to go to the hospital, and the parallels may not be that exact, but I think the point is that life is continuing to happen, and while decline is happening also. And so I think it's important to kind of make space for both of those emotions. And people process emotions differently. For some, they want to talk about it. For some, they want to internalize. But I think it's critical that we allow ourselves to be happy or to have happy moments, even when there is this overwhelming sense of something happening in the background. One, for our own mental sanity, but two, because that's life, right? It's not all one or the other. It's shades of gray in terms of how things evolve. And I think for me, it took some time to kind of allow that joy to happen, and to not feel guilty about it. I think occasionally, we have guilt that good things are happening or that we're having fun when somebody we care about is not doing well. But if we're lucky enough to have people we love and people who love us, they want us to feel that joy and see that development happen if they were well. And so I think it's important to let go of some of that guilt and allow both of those feelings to coexist.
Sure. Now, caregiving is really interesting because there's no rule book for it, right? Well, not yet.
Not
Now
yet.
there is, but there's no rule book. There's no prep for it. When you're 10 years old, nobody's like, one day this is how you're going to have to take care of me. Like, those conversations aren't generally had, and so, I'd like you to explain like any misconceptions you think are out there about caregiving, the burnout that's associated with, especially for younger adults. And maybe like you're forming your career, you're in a new relationship, you just got married, you were a young mother. So it's like, one chapter of your life is really propelling, while the other one, it's like you sometimes you have, like you said, that need to stop, that need to pivot, that need to be in two places at one time, the need to watch your baby's first steps, and then the need to turn around and go check on your father. And so it's like, do you think there are any misconceptions about caregiving and burnout? Or do we make assumptions that that's what's associated with that experience?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, there really isn't a rule book, or I found it was really hard to just. One of the things I always like to tell people is I think expectation management is critical, and that's true in so many things in our life, right? You kind of want to get a sense of what you're getting yourself into before you pursue something. It's like, oh, I want to be I don't know, I want to be in marketing because I know what marketing looks like. I want to be a doctor because I go to the doctor, I see what they do. I think very few people are like, I want to be a caregiver or I'm ready to be a caregiver because I understand what that looks like. Because there really is no playbook and it's really hard to figure out what to expect. In part, that's because it looks different for many different people. In part, that's because we don't talk about it because it's not super glamorous and sexy and cool. It's really can be draining and overwhelming and challenging. And in part, it's because our kind of system of healthcare and of caring for people as they age is not set up to support caregivers, family caregivers, unpaid caregivers, or just long-term care in general. So I think we kind of have a big gap in knowing or having a sense of what caregiving looks like from a pretty young age. And I think some of the misconceptions around that have to do with you know you see a movie and you have like the nice, cute, crotchety grandma in the corner who's chiming in and, she's forgetting things. She has her dentures, but she's sort of there and present and she can just be kind of managed in her rocking chair. And it's like that caricature does, people who are ailing or aging a disservice, and it does caregivers a disservice because that then sets up our norm like, oh, somebody who is aging and maybe living at home, they can just, they're just chilling there. And that's not reality. Like they have a lot of needs. And I think, and somebody has to address them. And if they're living at home with you, then that falls on whoever they're living with or the family unit. That also care becomes expensive, even if it's, not medical care. It's all this stuff that, to make sure that they're safe. It's the time that you are spending on caregiving that maybe you're not spending on working outside of the home. And so I think, we don't get a great understanding of what caregiving looks like in the outside world from anything we see kind of in the media or unless we've experienced it ourselves. And that experience can sometimes then be hard to talk about. So I think the misconceptions have a lot to do with the amount of work and the amount of moving parts that go into caregiving. And what I've tried to do when I was having this experience is really try and think about what all those moving parts look like and try and talk with folks about what they experience, what helped them. Because I didn't get a good sense going into it of what this experience was going to look like. And there was so much that really took me by surprise and was hard to expect during the caregiving journey.
So was this experience what motivated you to write your new book? Was it the inspiration behind it, or was this a long time passion project for you?
Yeah, 100%. I think that when this was my experience with caregiving in watching my siblings and my mom be part of that caregiving experience and really like our whole extended network was the impetus to trying to create a resource, especially for younger adults, around what it means to be a caregiver, especially at a younger age in this kind of day and time. Because we do have a lot of resources that are available to us, online or through technology and through the evolving healthcare system, but they're extremely hard to navigate. They're really disconnected. And there wasn't a great kind of piece of information out there when I went to Dr. Google or was kind of going about, searching that really seemed to one be targeted to this age group that has all these competing priorities. And two, really made sense of both the big picture, like what does a horizon of caregiving look like, short term, long term, long term, right? Depending on how long somebody is coping with being ill. And then some of the nuts and bolts of like, how do you navigate some of those really hard conversations with the person who maybe has received this diagnosis and with other family members who are likely part of the conversation. So I was seeking that. When I spoke with other folks who are in a similar position to me, they were seeking that too, and that was the impetus to creating this book.
Thank you so much. I know you have a great background in public health. Did that influence the way you navigated caregiving and writing this book?
Yeah, so I'm trained as a public health professional. I have a PhD in public health and really focused on in part on communication and social and behavioral sciences. And I would say that skill set, learned research skills and how to ask questions and try and kind of get answers from a lot of folks and make sense of that information. Um, and so I think that I recognize one, how much our health and well-being are intricately tied to so much in our environment and our interpersonal relationships, and how communication around these health topics is critical, right? You can have all of the stuff out there in the world, but if you can't articulate what your needs are, if you can't figure out how to make it work for yourself and for those around you, it's really hard to act upon whatever resources may be available to you. So I would say topically and then skills wise, thinking about how do we make sense of these caregiving experiences? How do we talk to people? I did dozens and dozens of interviews with people who had been caregivers or who supported caregivers. Um, and how do we make sense of that information and put it into kind of big buckets that can then create this resource? So I tried to apply those skills and that background knowledge in creating this book, because there is so much beyond the healthcare system that is critical to caregiving, and so much that's left out of what, say, health insurance may cover if somebody is ill, or and I think it's critical to try and bring in all those different pieces of our society, that, social work, long-term care, nursing homes, hospice, occupational and physical therapists, financial planners, legal services that are relevant and come up when we're trying to think about caregiving. So it was a total labor of love and application of this background that I feel like really helped support this resource coming into being.
Well, congrats on your PhD, all your incredible
Yeah.
work. And I feel like this topic is always going to be timely. Like whether it's 100 years ago or
Unfortunately,
100 years from now, it's always going to be timely. What advice do you have for others who may feel invisible or overwhelmed while caring for someone else?
I've been there. I think one of the hardest things about caregiving is that when you're in the thick of it, it is so hard to talk about. I think, and that can be for a few different reasons. I'll say for me, I found it painful to try and articulate what I was experiencing. And I felt like I was almost betraying the person that I was supporting by sharing things that were not necessarily positive about what was happening during their decline, because it's out of their control, but it's also part of my experience. And so navigating kind of that feeling of how do you speak with others to support your own coping, but also um, let go of some of the shame and guilt you feel that you can't control what's happening to the person that you're caring for. And those were just my own emotions. I think people have many different emotions during the caregiving experience, but I found it really hard to talk about. I also felt like when people asked, how's it going? It's like, do you really want to know how it's going? Because it takes a lot to unpack. And I think unless you've been in that situation, it's really can be overwhelming to articulate. And I say that because I think it's critical for caregivers, whether they're young or at any age, to recognize like there are others who are having this experience. There are online support forums and you can sign up, or you can write anonymously on them. You can sign up to do a virtual caregiving support group. You can go in person depending on what the issue is and where you're based. And lots of local nonprofits have support groups. Lots of social workers can connect people to support groups. But those resources may not be for everybody. So if you're feeling kind of alone and isolated, it also can be as simple of scheduling in a walk with a good friend, once a week. And maybe you talk about caregiving, maybe you talk about something else. But the point is figure out a potential coping mechanism that may feel good for you and allow yourself to do that, because it's not going to go away by not talking about it.
Very true, very true. Well, I have enjoyed this conversation with you
Me
thus far,
too.
but before we wrap up, I have a few lightning round questions if you don't mind.
Of course.
Okay, first one is, I mean, this can be burdensome sometimes, and I'm speaking from experience. It can be burdensome, it can be overwhelming, it can be emotional, but how do you practice self-care for yourself?
Yeah, for me it was I had like a regularly scheduled dinner with a few girlfriends that I would go and do, and we would talk about total nonsense and rarely talk about caregiving, and it really lightened my mood and gave me lots of energy, and I looked forward to those times.
Love that. What's one word that describes your current season of life?
Busy.
Okay.
I have three little kids now, and so even though that my independent caregiving experience has ended between professional life and personal life, trying to soak it all up, and it seems like there's never a dull moment.
18 plus more years to go.
That's right, exactly.
Are you a coffee or tea drinker?
Coffee, iced coffee in all seasons.
Love it. A small habit that you do that makes a big difference in your life.
Let's see. A small habit. Prioritize putting my kids to bed. It's like when we ground after the day, we like enjoy the downtime together, and I miss it when I don't do it.
Almost a dream dinner guest, alive or historical.
Oh, it's hard to not say my dad after having this
Mhm,
conversation.
mhm.
You know, you always I think when somebody loses kind of that ability, you just I still have phantom conversations with him occasionally. You go to pick up the phone and think, oh wait, he's not there to answer. So at this point, it's hard to think of anybody else.
Okay, that's fair. And last question. What's a book, including the one you just wrote, that changed the way you think?
Yeah. Um, my favorite book as a child, and I still think about it, and I'm not there, was The Giver by Lois Lowry. So it's hard. But just kind of thinking about how we accept people who they are in society, and how society is critical, is built on people who are not only the same but have differences. And I think that part of creating this resource and part of some of the stories that I tell is to remember that people, even if they're declining, especially if they have cognitive decline, like they're still there and they can still hear you. And caregivers can feel when you are having challenges, kind of accepting somebody who may not be as responsive or be as physically able-bodied as they used to be. So I think The Giver had, I don't know, I always come back to that. It had great lessons that have just stuck around with me.
Absolutely incredible. Well, Dr. Rachael Piltch-Loeb, I want to thank you for being my special guest on the Chundria Show
Thank you for
today.
having me. It's great to chat with you.
Of course, congratulations on your new book. How can we get a copy of that?
Well, the book is available wherever books are sold. So bookshop.org, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, and many local bookstores. So appreciate you highlighting it and your time very much.
Of course, my pleasure. All right.